Famously, Ralf and Florian developed a fascination with cycling. Very rock and roll. Such was their obsession, they would go on to base an album around it. Ralf Hütter explains.
We fell in love with the sport around the period of recording the man machine, and exactly that's what it is. Kraftwerk is the man machine, but cycling is also man and their machines. So there's a lot of poetic parallels, you could say, in those two fields. And then again, it's always going forward, no standstill.
The fifth instrument in their sound was the vocal, often delivered through a vocoder by Ralf Hütter.
The background of our music is in the lyrics of the compositions, because they are phonetics or musical poems, sound poems, like Boing Boom Chuck is the music, speaks for itself, or Fahren, Fahren, Fahren auf der Autobahn is like the drone that is combining the continuity and the endless quality of rolling down the Autobahn. We are the robots, or robotic language. So we work with language and these expressions, or I program my home computer, beam myself into the future, makes the music speak for itself. We do not write long poems like songwriters or so. It's more words that are opening certain directions within the composition.
I suppose that became the easiest thing for people to mimic about Kraftwerk, the kind of "we are the robots" kind of sound. For Little Boots, these simple German accented lyrics are part of the cool, mysterious sound.
I think definitely the voices on Kraftwerk sound very cool. They definitely, it's got that. I think a lot of the associations I have with like Berlin now being this hip centre of electronic music and stuff can kind of date back to things like that, and hearing those kind of robotic German voices, but they also sound kind of sexy. And, you know, they just kind of sound, it just works. Everything just works, and it's so simple but so complicated at the same time, which is one of the hardest things to achieve and get right.
I remember really the main thing that impressed me about Kraftwerk from the first time I heard them was maybe that their music just didn't sound anything like other people's, and I think that's probably difficult for people to picture now. Maybe because they were using synthesized sounds, it actually sounded bigger and cleaner and shinier than any other music, and came across on the radio very, very well. It really did seem like music from the future that somehow got beamed into your living room. And I guess the rest of the world has kind of caught up with them since then. New Order's Stephen Morris.
I mean, the thing about Kraftwerk is every time they bring out a new record, the first time you put it on, you think, oh, it's not as good as the last one. Yeah, oh no, they've lost it here. But then, like, you know, a few years later on, you put it on and it's fantastic. They've just got such incredibly high standards that, you know, you keep expecting them to surpass it. And they don't, they just do something that's ever so slightly different.
While Kraftwerk were experiencing their creative peak, many of their contemporaries were fading from the scene. By the 80s had all but disappeared from the record buyer's consciousness. So what went wrong? Neu may have been one of the greatest krautrock groups, but only released 3 proper albums. And like Michael Rutter's other legendary band, Harmonia, who had done so much to influence Brian Eno and shape the sound of David Bowie in the 70s, they were finished by the end of the decade.
From my perspective, the 80s were rather lost because in the early 80s, the record company that had released Neu and Harmonia stopped selling those because there was no demand. And we tried to record a new album and talk to several companies, and there was not enough interest.
Jean-Hervé Perron.
I think the times were different, or we were too fast, or we were too avant-garde. So apparently in the 70s, 80s, we did something that people were not ready for.
But why did Kraftwerk emerge as the most commercially successful of the krautrock groups? Michael Rütter again.
The pop songs they created in the late 70s and early 80s were something that fit into the pop spectrum much better than a 10-minute track like Hallo Gallo, which, you know, you can't play it on the radio and you can't sing it, you can't sing along. And I think that there are maybe some more reasons why Kraftwerk, maybe they're even better. But they definitely are more pop than the other bands from Germany.
Jean-Hervé Perron.
It took me a long while to accept people who create music, good music, without being physically involved, which is a very square-headed, a bit conservative way of seeing things. So if you ask me, I much prefer being physically involved in the music. There is an aspect which I cannot defend intellectually.
In 1982, a mere 7 years after their first chart breakthrough with Autobahn, Kraftwerk had their follow-up hit single. Originally recorded in 1978, Das Model was re-released in 1981 as the B-side to the single Computer World. British DJs fell in love with it, and the model, apparently against the wishes of the band, was released again and became a #1 song. The producer, whose credits include Madonna and U2, William Orbit.
It's just got that glimmering sound. It sounds ever so fresh even now, even though the drums are kind of little small drums, and it just sounds sparkling and fresh.
In 1987, Connie Plank passed away. The producer had made such a significant contribution to the sound of Kraftwerk, Cluster and Neu, before working with Brian Eno, the Eurythmics, Ultravox and even the Scorpions. Shortly before he died, he was even lined up by Brian Eno to produce the Joshua Tree for U2, Michael Rütter.
He considered himself to be a midwife, in the way that he helped musicians create what they wanted to do, because sometimes the ideas weren't clear, it were still visions.
Kraftwerk's influence appeared in unexpected places. In the UK, a synth-pop sound was blossoming. In Japan, Yellow Magic Orchestra thrived. And maybe most unexpectedly, Kraftwerk were ringing out in the streets of New York. Hip-hop pioneer Afrika Bambaataa was carving himself a reputation in the late 70s block party scene as the most experimental DJ around. Rock, soul, disco, and obscure slices of randomness made his set stand out.
Well, I never heard of Kraftwerk. I found them from digging in the crates, from seeing the album covers and look at the words in the back and check the titles to see if they grabbed me. Definitely looked at it and seen it. I was saying, I wonder who these 4 white guys from Germany was. And I said, let me take this home and check it out. It just looked interesting. Something called Trans-Europe Express. Then when I took it home and heard it, it just blew my mind. I said, I'm going to be jamming this. I don't know how my audience is going to react playing it, but I'm going to play it. And eventually it took off. And I became a Kraftwerk fanatic and started digging up all the other materials that they made.
And what did he think he'd discovered?
The funky music for the future. So I looked around and tried to see what other black American groups that was playing that sound, and I didn't really see none. So I said, well, this is something I got to flip and make it to that funk sound and add that funk to it. And thus became that birth of that electro-funk sound. And from that electro-funk sound came all your Miami bass, your freestyle. So I said, yeah, this is definitely going to be the funk for the future. And it's not even finished yet, because as we become intergalactic humans, you're going to even see it develop.
Intergalactic human or not, Bambaataa and acts like Sugar Hill Gang started releasing tracks based around highlights from DJ sets, mixing songs together to create something new. In Bambaataa's case, the outcome was legendary.
I just put 4 songs together that we played a lot in hip-hop, and thus was Captain Sky, which was Super Sperm, The Mexican by Beirut, Kraftwerk's Trans-Europe Express, and Kraftwerk's Numbers, and put it together, and thus became that classic hit, Planet Rock.
Meanwhile, the influence was also hitting the post-punk scene in the UK. After the death of Ian Curtis, the 3 remaining members of New Order were looking for a new direction. Stephen Morris.
It was later on when we started New Order, and we were trying to think of a way so we wouldn't be Joy Division, really. It's very hard to say, to turn your back on something that you loved and do something different. But we got into drum machines and synthesizers. None of that would have happened if we hadn't have had Kraftwerk.
And a mixture of laziness and a bit of Kraftwerk-like synth inspired one of the 80s biggest hits.
It had long been a bugbear of ours, the fact that we had to do encores, and when we could actually be off down a pub or off at a club somewhere drinking and have to go and play another song. So wouldn't it be great if we just wrote this song and we could just press a button and then we wouldn't actually be doing an encore, we'd have made a machine that did it. And so that was kind of a bit of the thinking behind it, and we were trying to make a machine song. It's an epic. It's like a bit of a film thing. Probably Blue Monday would have been Blue Monday without something like Trans-Europe Express. That's got that same sort of cinematic quality about it. This little film unravels in your head while you're listening to it.
Even Kraftwerk were impressed.
It was when they were doing Tour de France. It may have been an entirely put-up job, I don't know, but this is how it happened to me, as I got a phone call from someone in Kraftwerk's management inquiring about how have they got we got the bass drums sound in Blue Monday, because Kraftwerk were very impressed with it.
Maybe Kraftwerk should have got themselves a real-life drummer. By now, the Kraftwerk influence was everywhere. Gary Newman, who not only seemed to base his sound, but his entire image around the Düsseldorf band. Synth-pop bands such as Soft Cell and Erasure, Visage, Depeche Mode, the Eurythmics, and the Pet Shop Boys. Connie Plank produced the Eurythmics, and you could hear his influence as he took control of Ultravox for the second time and adapted his sound to their biggest hit. And their influence on the new romantic movement was clear. Martin Kemp of Spandau Ballet.
Kraftwerk with the Model is the record that for me sums up those fantastic days of walking in the Blitz Club on a Tuesday night in Covent Garden, seeing Steve Strange on the door, dressed in the most outrageous clothes, Boy George in the cloakroom, taking the coats off of people, David Bowie there. The atmosphere was so incredible. I think Kraftwerk was the electronic sound, really, that kind of led Spandau into the first record, which was, to cut a long story short, and it gave us that kind of electronic synthesizer edge that we all know so well nowadays, that even records like LaRue are kind of imitating in a way. And I think all of that leads back to Kraftwerk and their sound.
It kind of merged into new romanticism and all that, and Visage, and there's nothing wrong with it really, but it didn't really have the same sort of quirkiness that Kraftwerk had. Everybody else, when they do it, they lose that and become a little bit po-faced. Like, Gary Newman, I'm sure must have a sense of humour, but it didn't really come across. He was a little bit too serious, really. And the thing is that I like Kraftwerk's. They probably don't take it too seriously. You can't. Even the whole man-machine thing. There's a bit of a grin on its face.
While commercial success faded for Kraftwerk, and there was little activity for the best part of 2 decades, the 21st century saw them re-emerge as a sought-after live act. Advances in technology meant they could get the gear back on the road. The live show is visually stunning. The light show and big screen in sync with the music. 4 men in a line at computers, wearing dark suits, barely moving. Screen behind them. On occasion, the living members of Kraftwerk replaced on stage by robots. Ralf Hütter.
Basically, Kraftwerk in concert is the same as in the studio, because we bring our studio on the stage. Of course, we leave the walls in Düsseldorf, and we have everything now on laptop computers. Therefore, we are very mobile again, which in the mid to late 70s we were not. And then again in the 80s we couldn't tour really with this old analog equipment, and it was so fragile. But now, since 2002, I think, when we started in Paris at Cité de la Musique, we are now completely mobile.
Madonna producer William Orbit.
I've seen them play live, and they are honestly the They're fantastic live. It's a lot to do with unbelievably good melodies and arrangements. And the sounds, it's just so simple. I mean, it's just simple and just physical. And they stand there on stage and do nothing. You know, that's a real tribute to how good the music is. Because they don't have to do any jumping around to make it work.
Kraftwerk is multimedia. It's a strange word, but we always have been doing, in the late 60s or early 70s, been doing drawings. We have been doing little video clips. We have been doing slideshows during the concerts. And the music is like a film. Therefore, our live appearance is so important. Coming from the reality of working with knobs and faders and buttons and keyboards, there's no time for us to jump around, so we're not a dance group. And when we want to dance, then we go to clubs. So on stage, there's a lot of concentration not to miss the next note. That's what it's all about.
Whilst their influence on modern dance and electronic music cannot be denied, Kraftwerk and their krautrock peers have also inspired more traditional rock groups. U2 covered Neon Lights.
Neon lights, shimmering neon lights.
And in 2006, Coldplay's love of Kraftwerk's Computer Love shot to the surface when they helped themselves to its riff for their track Talk. So what's it like getting permission from Kraftwerk to use their track? Chris Martin.
Well, the most fun part was having to write them a letter in German, which it took about 9 hours to write it, and then we had a friend who spoke German who was helping us translate, but it was, basically a fan letter, but in German, which was like, Lieber Ralf, etc., etc. Please, can we use your song? And then we got a letter back saying, okay.
They've been sampled, covered, and borrowed from more than almost any other act. So this unique gesture was obviously appreciated. Ralf Hütter.
As you know, a lot of people have been just doing the same without asking us or giving us any chance to say yes or no. So our music was sampled on a lot of records. I'm not talking about club records, but I'm talking about pop or commercial records. And therefore, it's, I think, a very fair gesture if you take something from another artist's work to ask. I think it's very good. In some records, it's very interesting to see ideas growing into other fields.
So why are these krautrock pioneers such an inspiration to my contemporaries today? Neu's Michael Rütter.
Maybe it has to do with the broad public being aware of roots that are in the music of bands they love, which are around these days, younger bands, and who sometimes say that they have been influenced by these German crazy guys from the 70s. And I think that has become stronger. Many more bands have expressed their influence, their inspiration they've taken. And I think that's led to a broad audience being aware of us.
Little Boots.
I think really, especially with electronic music, people haven't pushed the boundaries, and people like Kraftwerk obviously were, and I think there is still a lot further for electronic music to go. And after the kind of golden age of synths, then I felt like in the last decade or two they've fallen out of favour again, and people aren't pushing electronic music as much as it could be. I'm not saying no one's pushing it, but they really were pioneers, and I think it still sounds futuristic because there's maybe still a long way that we can go.
And in 2003, krautrock lovers would have received a pleasant surprise if they went to see Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill. Michael Rütter.
I think that amazed quite a lot of people. The story is that I found out about a Chinese kung fu film, Master of the Flying Guillotine, that had used our music, and the villain, the main character, kills his opponents by throwing a hat which has some daggers, and then the heads fall off. And that's something I think Quentin Tarantino really loved. When he saw that, he wanted to have the same music, the same sound effects, and so it ended up in Kill Bill. And many people who didn't know Neu music were attracted by that film, of course, to us.
And with acts like Kanye West and Black Eyed Peas experimenting with these electronic sounds, Africa Bambaataa agrees.
Some people get tired of just hearing, certain sounds of just gangsters or killing yourself or calling a woman out their name. So people wants that vibe where they could feel the party atmosphere again. I still play them to death to this day. I don't let nobody forget about the true school of music that was out there. So I try to keep true school music alive for people could hear all these great sounds, because a lot of people are sampling or just jacking. A lot of these youth today think this is a new sound, and so I let them know where it's coming from.
Jean-Hervé Perron.
The audience has caught up with us. The group of our generation did was very concentrate. It's like a product highly concentrated, so you can't drink it like this. You've got to put an awful lot of water. It took about 4 decades, so now it is okay to drink, to take a big gulp of it and have fun.
Ralf Hütter.
Electro is, like we said, around the world. When we tour, we go to clubs in Singapore or in South America. It's everywhere. It's such an interesting art form. It's taken a lot of possibilities for all cultural influences. From Mexico, it'll sound different than, say, in Russia.
The Orb's Alex Patterson.
Their past albums are just something that they were made with dreams involved. These things don't come lightly to people. And this whole series of albums, very similar to like the Beatles collection of albums within a certain time frame. They're just irreplaceable. They should be locked in a museum, and they're national treasures. And they're not just national treasures; they're treasures of the world.
From isolated pockets of Germany to a global sound, Kraftwerk now find themselves touring and headlining bigger events than they ever did in the 1970s. And the crowds are that fantastic mix from 16 to 60. It might have been mocked or just thought of as plain weird initially, but krautrock was the sound of post-war German youth moving on and finding their own voice. More than that, the progressive nature of this music led to the invention of 1,000 musical genres and subgenres, and has fundamentally changed pop music. Ralf Hütter.
In the beginning, we were always outsiders, and we couldn't play here, we couldn't play there. We had technical problems, we had all kinds of strange situations, and people didn't understand the music. But today, I think we're living in a very open situation where we can go anywhere in the world and play our electronic music, and that for me is the most encouraging thing that ever happened in my life.